the January 6th Insurrection and Christian Nationalism. Welcome to FFRF's Ask an Atheist. I'm Dan Barker. I'm co-president of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, which produces the show. This week, we're excited to announce that the Freedom from Religion Foundation has partnered with the Baptist Joint Committee to produce an in-depth report and an expose on the Christian nationalist underpinnings of the insurrection on January 6th, 2021. Scholars, authors, historians, and experts on Christian nationalism, including our own FFRF attorney Andrew Seidel and the author Catherine Stewart, contributed to this groundbreaking report. That hard-hitting report was announced last week during a joint webinar, and today we're going to watch that event, which features most of the distinguished authors of the report, notably including some Christian scholars and authors who are just as concerned as we are about the threat of Christian nationalism to democracy and to our secular government. Since this show today we're going to show a pre-recorded show today, we will not be taking comments or questions, but now let's listen to and let's see the Baptist Joint Committee Executive Director, Amanda Tyler, who will introduce the forum.
Freedom from Religion Foundation and BJC are two organizations that are committed to advocating for the importance of separating the institutions of government and religion as a necessary safeguard for preserving everyone's religious freedom, those who claim a faith tradition and those who do not. Both organizations view the rise of Christian nationalism, a political ideology and cultural framework that seeks to merge American and Christian identities, as an urgent threat to this safeguard. The January 6th insurrection showed how, in the hands of violent extremists, Christian nationalism can also turn deadly and threaten the continuation of our democracy itself. Combating and ultimately dismantling Christian nationalism will take a broad coalition working together across their lines of difference against this common threat. This joint project between our organizations models that kind of broad coalition. Freedom from Religion Foundation and BJC have brought together some of the leading scholars, experts, researchers, journalists, and leaders who study Christian nationalism through a variety of frameworks to contribute to a single report detailing how Christian nationalism was used to bolster, justify, and intensify the January 6th attack on the Capitol. Today, we will hear from several contributors to the report and then take questions from the press about the report. And now I will hand it over to Annie Lloyd Gaylor for some introductory remarks.
And I do want to just say a few words about Christian nationalism as well, which predates our nation's founding. As the old joke goes, the Puritans loved religious freedom so much, they decided to keep it all for themselves. There have always been arch critics of the fact that America was first among nations to adopt a godless, entirely secular constitution, prohibiting any religious test for public office, placing sovereignty not in a divinity, but in we the people. Excuse me. It was a revolutionary act to found a secular government, thereby ensuring freedom for all, believers and non-believers. But there has been a continual backlash, notably beginning with the Christian Party in politics in the 1820s. Christian nationalism has ebbed and flowed. When my mother, Ann Gaylor, and I founded FFRF back in 1976, Jerry Falwell's form of Christian nationalism was flowing. He has been replaced with a seemingly infinite number of successors, both private citizens and government officials, including some who sit today on our U.S. Supreme Court, who seek to inscribe their own particular dogma into our civil laws. In working to keep religion and government separate, the most common objection we hear is, but America is a Christian nation. Yesterday, in fact, I answered the phone and a man screamed at me, "You effing bitch, you're not a Christian, you should leave this country." because if our government truly were Christian, that would turn the rest of us into outsiders. And debunking that myth is one of the reasons FFRF exists. We've heard this refrain for more than 40 years. We typically shrug it off, but none of us should shrug off what happened on January 6th, 2021. The events of that day have only strengthened FFRF's commitment to work so that reason and our secular constitution will prevail, and for the aspirational concept embodied in the original secular motto, E pluribus unum. E pluribus unum is the answer to the hatred, divisiveness, racism, and violence we saw that day. For many people, to become one requires, among other things, having a government that doesn't take sides on religion. We are delighted to have experts here today to tell you about the white Christian nationalist underpinnings of an event some are newly redubbing legitimate political discourse, but which most of us agree with Jamie Raskin was unthinkable.
Thank you so much, Annie Laurie, for those wonderful introductory remarks. And now we will hear short presentations from some of the report's contributors about their sections of the report. First up, we have Andrew Whitehead and Samuel Perry. Andrew Whitehead is an associate professor of sociology and director of the Association of Religion Data Archives at the Center for the Study of Religion and American Culture at Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis. Samuel L. Perry is an associate professor of sociology at the University of Oklahoma. They are the co-authors of Taking America Back for God, Christian Nationalism in the United States. Their contribution to this report is titled, What is Christian Nationalism?
Thank you, Amanda and Annie, and it's so good to be with you all. In our work, Sam and I conceptualize white Christian nationalism as a cultural framework. So a collection of myths, traditions, symbols, value systems that idealize and advocate for a fusion of Christianity with American civic life. And the Christianity of white Christian nationalism doesn't necessarily refer alone or only to Orthodox religious beliefs, although it does. It also is really more of a conservative ethnocultural and political orientation. So research on white Christian nationalism suggests that this ideology combines several different elements that we find, including moral traditionalism that's rooted in hierarchical social arrangements, authoritarian social control that justifies violence and militarism, and also strict ethno-racial boundaries surrounding national membership, civic participation, and social belonging. So as you will see in the report, white Christian nationalism is strongly and positively associated with believing that, quote, outside agitators like Antifa and Black Lives Matter were in the crowd that day, and also strongly and negatively associated with believing then President Trump held any blame for escalating the violence or spreading misinformation that encouraged the riot. And in a variety of surveys that we've collected and others have collected throughout 2021, we find that white Christian nationalism not only provided theological cover for the insurrection with this idea of this is a country that was given to us by God and we have to take it back, but also is a part of mutually reinforcing other important influences motivating the violence that we saw that include, but are not limited to, first, the big lie, where 2/3 of white Americans who strongly embrace Christian nationalism agree that the, quote, 2020 election was rigged and did not reflect the will of the people. Also, number two, a comfort with political violence to achieve desired ends, where 40% of white Americans who strongly embrace Christian nationalism agree that, quote, true American patriots may have to resort to physical violence to save our country. And finally, with conspiratorial thinking and especially embracing QAnon, where over 40% of white Americans who strongly embrace Christian nationalism, white Christian nationalism, agree with the statement that, quote, top Democrats are involved in elite child sex trafficking rings, which was a key belief of the QAnon conspiracy that we saw present on January 6th. So as you can see, white Christian nationalism is a key part of this story of making sense of the insurrection on January 6th.
Like Andrew, I'm so grateful to have this opportunity to share some of our research. Subsequently, since we've collected data that we shared in the report, we have analyzed new data, in fact, that have shown how Christian nationalism is actually helping Americans reinterpret and reshape their understanding of the January 6th insurrection in ways that are pointing in a direction of future authoritarian violence. So, for example, we find that those who subscribe to Christian nationalism, who we define as ambassadors in our book and in our research, they have since doubled. Between February 2021 and August 2021, they actually doubled in their support of the Capitol protesters, of the rioters who were at the Capitol. The percentage of ambassadors of Christian nationalism who believe that the rioters should be prosecuted and locked up has actually declined by 20% over the year of 2021, suggesting that this ideology is powerfully connected to a reinterpretation of these events in a way that is opening the door for possible future violence as well. And so this is something that we feel like is absolutely necessary to look out for, how Christian nationalism is being used in conjunction with conspiracy theory, in conjunction with misinformation and siloing of information sources. We believe this is going to be a powerful motivator for future and potential violence. Something else we want to talk about, though, and just as we show in the report, we draw a distinction in the report between religious commitment as traditionally understood and Christian nationalist ideology. Something that we have found again and again in our studies is that the more Americans, once we account for Christian nationalism in our statistical models, in other words, we hold that constant, oftentimes we find that religious practice or religious commitment as traditionally defined does not necessarily incline Americans towards greater intolerance, Islamophobia, racism, xenophobia, all of these kinds of prejudicial attitudes that we take to be antisocial and unproductive or anti-democratic. We actually find oftentimes that once we account for Christian nationalism, we find that religious practice oftentimes is associated with pro-social attitudes and tolerance. And so we want to distinguish between those two and to not confuse people to think that we are talking about religious commitment necessarily, but this is a very particular kind of ideology. Also in our report, one last point, we draw a distinction between Christianity and Christian nationalism, and that is not to commit what we'd call the no true Scotsman fallacy, which is to say something like, oh, no real Christian could ever be a Christian nationalist. We don't mean to imply that at all. Certainly, many of the persons who subscribe to Christian nationalist ideology are Christians. Most of them, in fact, are self-identified Christians. But at the same time, we wish to point out the empirical reality that a large percentage of Christians do not affirm our indicators of Christian nationalism. And in fact, we find that a minority of Americans who do not identify as Christians, some of them actually affirm our indicators of Christian nationalism, which suggests that this is a freer floating ideology that is connected to power and ethnicity and political dominance. And yes, it is connected to Christianity, but it is okay to empirically distinguish or conceptually distinguish between the two in ways that allow us to make sense of those data.
Thank you so much, Andrew and Sam, not just for your remarks today and your contributions to this report, but to your many contributions to this area of scholarship from which we are all learning and benefiting. Next up, we will hear from Dr. Jemar Tisby, a historian of race and religion and author of 2 books, The Color of Compromise, The Truth About the American Church's Complicity in Racism, and also How to Fight Racism. His contribution to the report is titled The Patriotic Witness of Black Christians.
Greetings. Thank you so much. My remarks dovetail quite nicely with what Dr. Perry was saying, which is simply to say that as we talk about white Christian nationalism, there is another Christian witness that we should pay attention to, particularly when it comes to how people understood their faith in relation to government and politics. So from the very beginning of European colonialism in North America, there was tension about whether to share the gospel or spread Christianity to enslaved people of African descent, because the fear was, once they heard this message of equality and liberty in Christ, that enslaved people would get these wacky notions that they deserved to be free. And indeed, those concerns were valid. What happened was people of African descent who adopted Christianity understood it to mean that they had certain civic rights and started to demand those rights. So all the way back in 1773, there was a letter from Black people to the Massachusetts General Court that says, in light of this growing momentum toward independence from Britain, they wrote to the court, "We cannot but expect your house will again take our deplorable case," meaning the enslavement of Black people, "into serious consideration and give us that ample relief, which as men we have a natural right to." And so they were understanding their equality as a natural right of all humanity. You move forward to the legendary abolitionist Frederick Douglass, who at one point was a licensed preacher in the African Methodist Episcopal Church. He writes this very well-known speech, "What to the Negro is the 4th of July." In it, he actually sounds some very patriotic notes. He references the so-called founding fathers, calls them statesmen, patriots, and heroes. But he does something different than white Christian nationalists do. He says that their principles led them to equality and liberty for all. He said, with them, justice, liberty, and humanity were final, not slavery and oppression. Douglass may have had rose-colored lenses on as he said that statement, but his point remains that if the nation was to remain faithful to its ideals, then it would lead to liberty and justice for all. And even in the civil rights movement, one of my historical heroes, Fannie Lou Hamer, gives this powerful testimony in 1964 at the Democratic National Convention. And she uses the phrase, "Is this America?" And she is reciting her very terrifying testimony of being harassed and threatened and terrorized because of her pursuit of voting rights. But she very much saw her pursuit of civil rights as in line with her Christianity and her faith. And she was calling, as many did, the nation to live up to its stated principles and ideals. So in conclusion, it is the idea that although white Christian nationalists have an understanding of religion that leads them to a very exclusionary, xenophobic, racist expression, there are other examples, such as Black Christians, who have understood their faith as motivating them toward multiracial democracy. And so it causes us to think again about the role of faith and religion, and also how we might engage certain religious groups in freedom in the context in which we're talking about.
Jamar, thanks so much for those remarks, for your contribution, for your prophetic leadership in this area, and for this really important reminder about an alternative way for Christians to engage in the public square that is constructive and unifying and not destructive, as Christian nationalism surely is. Our next presenter and contributor is Catherine Stewart. She has reported on the religious right for more than a decade. She is the author of The Power Worshippers: Inside the Dangerous Rise of Religious Nationalism. Her contribution to the report is titled Network of Christian Nationalism Leading Up to January 6th.
Thank you so much. I want to thank the Baptist Joint Committee, FFRF, and my fellow panelists for this important conversation. Christian nationalism played a decisive role in former President Trump's attempt to overturn the 2020 election. Most of us have seen the Christian nationalist placards and flags in the January 6th assault on our Capitol, and all that, signage and symbolism. But the connection goes much deeper. Trump's coup attempt really began when he started spreading the lie about election fraud, and Christian nationalism made its contribution even before that, in a sense, by establishing the conditions on the ground that would make such an attack on the constitutional system possible in the first place. So 3 conditions were essential in enabling the coup attempt. The first is the creation of an information bubble where a large block of supporters can be separated from the facts, sort of warehoused, if you were, in a state of misinformation that makes it very hard for them to absorb the facts. And the Christian nationalist movement, along with major media propaganda networks, has been very successful in creating such an information bubble. The second condition is the promotion of a sense of persecution and resentment among the rank and file and directing it at their political enemies. Former President Trump relied very heavily on the sense of grievance and continues to in his speeches. But back then, much of it was manufactured and placed at his service by leaders of the Christian nationalist movement. Among such leaders, it's a matter of routine to hear talk that they're engaged in a battle against tyranny with so-called demonic forces, by which they mean their political opposition. And they frequently warn that the Bible will soon be outlawed and believers arrested at church. So there's this enormous sense of grievance and persecution that they cultivate. A final precondition for the coup attempt was the belief among the target population that the legitimacy of the United States government derives from its commitment to a particular religious and cultural heritage and not from its democratic form. It's astonishing to so many of us that the leaders of the January 6th attack styled themselves as patriots, but it makes a glimmer of sense once we start to understand that their allegiance is to a belief in blood, earth, and religion, rather than to the mere idea of a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. So how exactly did the Christian nationalist movement establish these three fundamental preconditions for an anti-democratic assault on the American constitutional system? To answer this question, I think it's helpful to know something about the movement itself, its structure, its forms of operation, and its ultimate goals. Christian nationalism is first and foremost a political movement. The goal of its most active leaders is power. They look forward to the day when they can rely on government for three things. Number one, power for themselves and their political allies. Number two, a steady stream of taxpayer funding for their initiatives. And finally, policies that favor certain supposedly approved religious and political viewpoints. The strength of the movement is in its dense organizational infrastructure, a closely interconnected network of right-wing policy groups, legal advocacy organizations, legislative initiatives, sophisticated data operations, networking groups, and a vast right-wing messaging sphere, all working together for common political aims. I describe this network and the leadership cadre in detail in my book, Power Worshippers. But what I show is that the movement is really leadership-driven and organization-driven. It's not driven by the rank and file, and it's unified by a commitment to a shared ideological vision and a certain set of messages. The right-wing conferences and strategy gatherings and other presentations that I have attended and reported on over the past year, audiences were told repeatedly and heatedly that America is and has always been a Christian nation, that the Bible is on the verge of being outlawed, and that the 2020 election was corrupt. In fact, at some of these gatherings, there were elections integrity experts in attendance and speaking, and that's sort of something that's really changed over the last couple of years. When Mr. Trump launched the effort to overturn the election by promoting the lie that it was stolen, let's consider where some of the most militant and coordinated support came from. Just one example, the Conservative Action Project. It's a group associated with the Council for National Policy, which serves as it serves to coordinate many of the movement's most powerful leaders. So this organization, the Conservative Action Project, CNP affiliated, made its position clear in a statement issued a week before the insurrection. It called for members of the Senate to, quote, contest the electoral votes from states that were the focus of Republicans' baseless allegations. And by then, prominent movement leaders, including people like Charlie Kirk, Eric Metaxas, and so many others, were already echoing or actively promoting the lie of the stolen election. Some others, like Michael Farris, he's the president and chief executive of the religious right legal advocacy group, Alliance Defending Freedom. He and many like him provided indirect but no less valuable support by concern trolling, I would say, about supposed constitutional irregularities, as they called it, in battleground states. None of the leaders appeared willing to condemn Mr. Trump for his involvement in an attempt to prevent the peaceful transfer of power. Today, the movement's most influential organizations have embraced the cause of election integrity as a fairly transparent means of undercutting faith in elections as a cornerstone of our democracy. In other words, the movement appears to be preparing the ground for a similar type of initiative or a continuation of the first. I want to thank you so much for listening, and I want to encourage everybody to read the full report, and I look forward to hearing from the other fellow panelists. Thank you.
Finally, today we will hear from Andrew Seidel, a constitutional attorney at the Freedom from Religion Foundation and author of The Founding Myth, Why Christian Nationalism is Un-American, and his forthcoming book, American Crusade, How the Supreme Court is Weaponizing Religious Freedom. Andrew is the principal organizer and the driving force behind this report. He has written 2 sections of the report, Events, People, and Networks Leading Up to January 6th, and Attack on the Capitol, Evidence of the Role of White Christian Nationalism.
Thank you so much, Amanda. Christian nationalism created a permission structure that gave the insurrectionists the moral and mental license that they needed to attack our government and attempt to overturn a free and fair election. And the evidence is overwhelming, indisputable, clear. The attackers told us loudly and repeatedly what they believed and why it justified the attack. They told us about their Christian nationalism. And we really ought to listen to them, because if we ignore the ideology that justified this attack in their minds, we are inviting future attacks. Because Christian nationalism is an existential threat to the American Republic. Christian nationalists held dry runs between Election Day and the attack, including the Million MAGA March on November 14th, the Jericho Marches Let the Church Roar rally on December 12th, the Women for America First rally also on December 12th, and the One Nation Under God prayer rally at the Supreme Court on January 5th. They believed, and they openly claimed, that they were doing the will of God. The crowds waved the same Christian flags and signs that were ubiquitous during the attack. The same speakers, including Roger Stone, Alex Jones, Mike Lindell, Ali Alexander, who founded Stop the Steal, and Michael Flynn, appeared at these rallies, preaching ever more belligerent messages. And the unifying theme across all the events, speakers, and crowds was Christian nationalism. The Million MAGA March on November 14th began with a prayer, and it was infused with Christian nationalism, like claiming that America is founded on Judeo-Christian principles. And that prayer really set the tone for everything that happened later. The Proud Boys attended that rally. They knelt in prayer, and then they later rampaged through the city, burning and stabbing. And these dry runs continued right up until January 6th. And one example that's in the report is the Jericho March. And this is a group that was founded by 2 federal workers who were sent visions from God to, quote, let the church roar. And the Battle of Jericho was a genocide. In the story, the biblical God orders his followers to march around the city of Jericho while blowing shofars, ram's horns, and then to violently sack the city and murder every living thing in it, including animals. So the Jericho March baptized itself after this event and then organized events that reenacted this story of slaughter. They marched around government buildings in state capitals and in DC, including the Capitol and the Supreme Court building, blowing shofars and claiming to know God's will. Sometimes I wonder, how could we possibly have been surprised by the violence that day? At the Jericho March's Let the Church Roar event on December 12th, which was organized with Stop the Steal, there was an exorcism and speeches by bishops, oath keepers, cardinals, former members of Congress, and former members of the military. The language preached that day was openly militant. For instance, the Reverend Kevin Jessup preached that, quote, this is a Judeo-Christian nation, and that he wanted to, quote, mobilize God's men made holy by the blood of Jesus Christ. Again, please read more in the report, because you'll see that this was a sermon of Christian conquest framed in militaristic terms: warrior, battle cry, mobilization, secret weapon, enlistment, strategic, prisoners of war, glory, deployed in hostile territory under enemy occupation, commissioned as special forces, stationed, final mission to end high treason. This was literally a call to arms. He preached, quote, the warrior mandate, a battle cry, a call to arms, his words. One lower level Jericho March coordinator, who is also the director of the National Day of Prayer Task Force for Missouri, hammered the podium repeatedly with a gavel while the crowd chanted, no king but Jesus. She thanked her God for giving them, quote, weapons of warfare, and finished, let this be one nation under God in Jesus' name, amen. Ali Alexander, who founded Stop the Steal, talked about shutting down DC because we can do all things through Christ who strengthens us. He concluded, we have God's favor, to God be the glory for God and country. And when Stuart Rhodes, the founder of the Oath Keepers, who was just recently charged with seditious conspiracy, took the stage at the Jericho March, at the Let the Church Roar event the Jericho March hosted, he called for a bloody war, quote, bloody war, before Trump was out of office, and he was cheered. Eric Metaxas, who's a popular radio host, author, and one of the most outspoken intellectual Zambonis for Christian nationalism, working to put a respectable face on this exclusionary ideology. When Rhodes finished preaching bloody war, Metaxas, who emceed the event, said, oh, God bless you. This guy's keeping it real, folks. And it wasn't just the imagery and the rhetoric and the flags and the signs. It was a devout belief that this is a Christian nation, that God chose Donald Trump, and that God was on their side. The attacker who kicked in Speaker Pelosi's door, hoping that the crowd would tear her, quote, into little pieces, was also quoted at one of his legal hearings saying, God is on Trump's side. God is not on the Democrat side. And if patriots have to kill 60 million of these communists, it is God's will. The attackers believe that this is their country given to them by their God, and that they are acting on his orders and defending his chosen one. And when reality collides with a belief system like that, violence is almost inevitable. And that's what happens on January 6th itself. Paula White began the day with a prayer, and in true Christian nationalist fashion, she actually added the United States of America to the Lord's Prayer. It's written down in Matthew 6. So she added America to a prayer that, according to the Bible, Jesus himself prescribed and crafted. You remember what happened when Trump called on the crowd to march to the Capitol. He also ended with a Christian nationalist flourish that many people don't actually recognize as such, but has a really fascinating history that we explore a little bit in the report and more in my book. There were impromptu worship concerts that broke out on that short march. And on their march to the Capitol, the Proud Boys were hailed as God's warriors and knelt in a prayer that was just full of typical Christian nationalist rhetoric about restoring the nation. They marched and then they attacked. One attacker carried a Christian flag onto the floor of the Senate and then rifled through the senators' desks. He's not been identified, let alone arrested or charged. The self-proclaimed QAnon shaman led a prayer in the Senate about patriotism and Jesus and restoring the nation, and ended that prayer in Jesus' name. One of those praying insurrectionists actually gave an interview later and talked about the prayer in the Senate. And he said of the Senate, quote, "We consecrated it to Jesus. That to me was the ultimate statement of where we are in this movement." And he's not wrong. A third praying insurrectionist posted a video saying, quote, "I just wanted to get inside the building so I could plead the blood of Jesus over it. That was my goal." And then he spends 40 minutes recounting every action he took that day. All of it, he believed, directed by God. Another insurrectionist, sipping a post-assault beer, told her social media followers why she attacked American democracy. Quote, "To me, God and country are tied. To me, they're one and the same. We are founded as a Christian nation, and we see how far we've come from that. We are a godly country, and we're founded on godly principles." And as Andrew and Sam mentioned, right, the idea that we're a Christian nation and Christian country and have slipped from those founding principles, that's a central tenet of Christian nationalism. And the imagery from that day is now infamous, and nearly all of it has a tie to Christian nationalism. And sometimes it's obvious, like, right, the huge wooden cross around which people worshiped and prayed while draped in Trump flags. But sometimes you have to look a little bit deeper to see the Christian nationalism. For instance, everybody remembers the gallows, but most people don't know that they signed the gallows as if it were a yearbook, writing, "Hang them high. In God we trust. God bless the USA. Hang for treason and amen." All of the disturbingly iconic imagery from that day has a tie to Christian nationalism, including the photo of the zip tie guy, the Confederate flag, and that splinter mob that Officer Eugene Goodman lured away from lawmakers. And of course, the flags and the signs were clear. Jesus is my savior. Trump is my president. One nation under God. In God we trust. Jesus saves. Jesus 2020. Bible verses and crosses were omnipresent. One sign simply said, "I am on your side, God." There were Catholic images of Jesus or Mary on banners and paintings and statues, some borne atop poles over the attackers' heads. A Bible was seen raised above the crowd like a Napoleonic eagle as the mob surged through one of the entrances, and again in the rotunda itself. They sang the battle hymn of the Republic in the rotunda, "Glory, glory, hallelujah, his truth is marching on," and they prayed there too. One of the people who entered the Capitol was actually a Catholic priest who admitted on camera to exorcising the demon Baphomet while he was there. And I want to be clear, because there were, of course, other motivations and drivers of the attack. But this Christian nationalist permission structure, doing God's will, fighting for God's law, returning the country to its Christian roots, pervaded all those other obvious drivers of the attack. And this is one of the points that Andrew Whitehead and Sam Perry made so well in their section and in their book. These groups united under the banner of Christian nationalism. And when I spoke to Luke Mogelson, the war correspondent who shot that viral New Yorker video footage, I spoke to him about that day and the Christian nationalism on display. And he explained it like this, and you'll find this in the report. He said, "The Christianity was one of the surprises to me in covering this stuff, and it has been hugely underestimated. That Christian nationalism you talk about is the driving force and also the unifying force of these disparate players. It's really the Christianity that ties it all together." I'm going to turn it back to Amanda in just one second here, but I just want to end by saying that we can beat Christian nationalism. We can relegate it back to the fringe whence it came. That means fighting the disinformation and the historical myths bred by this threatening exclusionary ideology. And it means, above all, a national recommitment to the separation of state and church. It means public officials honoring that separation as one of America's founding ideals, one of the truly unique contributions of our Constitution, not just to political science, but to all of humanity. It means understanding that there's no freedom of religion without a government that's free from religion. America is really a shared idea, and Christian nationalism refuses to share. It excludes non-Christians and the wrong kind of Christians, as this report shows. So America will never be the Christian nation that Christian nationalists want, because the moment it becomes a Christian nation, it will cease to be America. Those two things cannot peacefully coexist. One is going to triumph, and that is the choice that we face as a nation: Christian nationalism or America, because we can't have both. Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you, Andrew, for your comments here today and for your contributions to this report, which I do believe is the most complete accounting of examples of Christian nationalism, not just on January 6th, but in all the events leading up to it, that has been put out to date. And in just a moment, we will be linking to the live report. The report, people on this webinar are seeing it publicly for the first time. So we are going to be linking to the report. I did also contribute to the report and just want to give a small or short summary of that contribution as well. I wrote the introduction and also a final section on Christian responses to Christian nationalism after January 6th. You know, even as someone who has been studying Christian nationalism for some time before the attack, I was shocked at the scale and severity of the insurrection, of course, but also about just how dire the threat of Christian nationalism is to our constitutional democracy. From my personal perspective as a Christian, seeing signs of my faith on display filled me with anger and frustration. The attackers used Christianity as a kind of mascot, trying to lend credibility and social acceptability to their terrorism. And in the process, they sullied Christianity and Jesus in the hearts and minds of people all over the world. Projects such as this report, which represents a broad and diverse coalition of Americans working together to understand Christian nationalism and call it out, are important. And necessary too is a strong response from American Christians, particularly white American Christians and predominantly white Christian institutions, which have contributed to and benefited from Christian nationalism in the culture. One such example of an organized response that predates January 6th is the Christians Against Christian Nationalism initiative. Launched in 2019 by BJC and endorsed by an ecumenical group of Christian leaders, Christians Against Christian Nationalism is a grassroots collective of individuals who self-identify as Christians and are taking a public stand against Christian nationalism. The events of January 6th served as a wake-up call for many Christians about just how destructive Christian nationalism can be, not just to American democracy, but to Christianity itself. We have undoubtedly seen renewed interest in learning more about Christian nationalism and acquiring tools and resources to use with congregations and communities to have conversations about it. We have also, predictably, faced defensive pushback and either willful or unintentional misunderstanding from some Christian audiences when we have called out Christian nationalism. Christian nationalism has become so embedded in some Christian communities that it can be hard to distinguish between the ideology of Christian nationalism and the religion of Christianity. To oppose Christian nationalism is not to oppose Christianity. In fact, many Christians, and I am one of them, see opposing Christian nationalism as key to preserving the faith. Christianity does not and cannot unite Americans under a national identity. And as we learn more about Christian nationalism, how it debases Christianity, and how it threatens to destroy American democracy, we are even more convinced of the need for a national commitment from religious and secular groups and individuals to furthering the American ideal that our belonging in society is not in any way conditioned or connected to our religious identity. The ideal of religious freedom for all, supported by the separation of the institutions of religion and government, can be a unifying force for all Americans, regardless of their religious beliefs.
And that was amazing. That's Amanda Tyler with the Baptist Joint Committee. And that was the Zoom webinar organized by the Baptist Joint Committee, announcing the important collaboration between the Freedom from Religion Foundation and the Baptist Joint Committee on this January 6th, 2021 insurrection and the Christian nationalist roots of that attack on the U.S. Capitol. You can read that report itself. You can read it yourself. That report is studded with photographs and it has links to videos. If you want to read that entire report, go to ffrf.us/Jan6 report. That's JAN 6 report. So that was incredible, and it's an important report that I think everybody needs to read. Nice to see believers joining with non-believers together in an important mission. So that's Ask an Atheist. We want to thank you, viewers. I understand there's somebody from London. Email, is that who's watching today from London? So hello across the pond. I know we all have our struggles dealing with religion and government. We also have a national TV show. It's called Free Thought Matters, produced by the Freedom from Religion Foundation. And this week on Free Thought Matters, we have a very famous and provocative guest. He's the well-known Princeton ethicist, Peter Singer.
It's easy for us to do good for people in extreme poverty at very little sacrifice. I've compared it with saving a child who's drowning in a shallow pond, where the only cost is that you'll ruin your expensive shoes that you're wearing, but you're going to save a child's life. And I think everybody would say that's the right thing to do. You'd be a monster if you said, no, I don't want to ruin my shoes, so I'm going to let this child drown. But in fact, every day there are children dying in low-income countries from preventable poverty-related causes. UNICEF says about 5 million a year, so something like 13,000 a day. And by giving to the most effective charities, we can save those lives.
And that's Peter Singer. You can watch that show on Free Thought Matters this week. We also have a radio show, Free Thought Radio, and this week our guest will be FFRF's Director of Governmental Affairs, Mark Dan, who will tell us about our efforts to lobby Congress to promote science and keep religion out of government. So that's it for Ask an Atheist. Tune in next week, same time, same place, Facebook Live Wednesdays at noon, where we hope to tell you about a major new lawsuit FFRF is planning to launch to protect students from religious proselytizing in the public schools. See you next week.